Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us today on this webinar on settling into university life in Australia, making targeted and effective support available to all international students. My name is Hannah. I'm a marketing executive here at Epigeum. Epigeum creates online training programs for higher education institutions, supporting them in three key areas: research, support and wellbeing, and studying, which is the area we're focused on today. Venturing into a place at university can be a challenging and complex change for anyone to undertake. All students can face struggles with culture shock, effective communication, and finding support away from home. But for international students, these challenges can often be exacerbated. With consistently high levels of demand for international student places in Australia and the international student experience increasingly being viewed as a core measure of success, the need for dedicated, holistic support has never been greater. Joining us today to discuss all of this and how institutions in Australia and New Zealand can best support their international students are three brilliant speakers. So please welcome Dr. Paula Durance, Education Consultant specialising in international student management and support and associated professional development. Paula provides consultancy services to international education providers, especially in the field of international student management, organisational reviews, professional development, and international student support. She develops and delivers training and professional development for people working with international students in education workplaces and community environments. She is also one of the lead advisors for our forthcoming online training programme, International Student Success. Also joining us, we have Associate Professor Melissa Russell, Senior Lecturer in Epidemiology at the Centre of Epidemiology and Biostatistics, the School of Population and Global Health at the University of Melbourne, Australia. In line with her interest in mental health and education, Melissa is involved in a large research project investigating University of Melbourne student wellbeing, with a particular focus on international students, and she is currently undertaking work to enhance the experience of international students in the Master of Public Health. She's also one of the lead advisors for International Student Success. And please also welcome Bronwyn Gilson, immediate past president of ASANA, head of international compliance at Charles Sturt University, and former manager of international services and compliance at the University of New England. And Bronwyn is one of the reviewers for International Student Success. Before we get started, I just have a few notes for our attendees today. There is a Q&A box to the right-hand side of your screen, which you are more than welcome to use or put questions in for our speakers for us to answer at the end. We also have a chat box, so please feel free to use this throughout the event if you wish. There will also be a poll during the event. Please be assured that your answers for this are anonymous. And finally, this webinar is being recorded and we will share the recording soon after the event, which will have captions enabled. If anyone needs any help or has any technical trouble throughout the event, please privately message Emily Viganola or email epigeuminfo@oup.com. So without further ado, I'll get started on our first question. So obviously the international student experience in Australia is varied, but what are the key challenges that international students face in preparing for university life in Australia? Paula, let's come to you first for this one.
Yes, thank you, Hannah, and welcome everybody. First, I'd like to acknowledge the Dja people who are the traditional owners of the land that I'm working on today. I pay my respects to their leaders and elders past, present and emerging. And Hannah, I think the question of challenges that students face in their preparation is perhaps a more complex one than we were discussing a couple of years ago. It's worth considering or reconsidering, I suppose, in the light of our current pandemic experience globally and particularly in Australia, because while many of those challenges have remained constant over time, as we know, some have required new and at times very rapid responses by education providers and of course by students themselves. The students have had to be very, very flexible, very patient, and their expectations of study in Australia have been shaken a little bit, perhaps. For example, if we look at the main issues students face, such as accommodation, the study environment, employment, social networks, and living conditions, cost of living, and so on, all of these contribute to student well-being, and therefore to their success ultimately, which is our main agenda, isn't it, in this program? But all of these things have been affected, especially for students yet to come to Australia and who have been studying from their home countries. So the expectations that students have about living and working in Australia, making friends and campus life and services and so on, have in many cases, I think, have had more virtual manifestations. There have been adjustments that have been made, and they've had to make those adjustments as well as the education providers. So I think what is emerging from this is that students and their providers are working together. I think we've heard a lot from students themselves. Last week, we had a major international education conference where a lot of initiatives, a lot of innovation, a lot of new thinking was presented at the ISANA conference. And so there are other elements now that have become new challenges for students requiring their responses, such as their ability to study online, adjustments, for example, in orientation, their orientation experiences. And another thing, before I finish, I'd like to mention is the possibility of students' attitudes and obviously their expectations, and our need to get ahead of the unintended consequences of some of the policy issues, where we need to engage very deliberately, very carefully, and with great sensitivity with our students. So perhaps we can't expect our students to be quite as robust and excited when they're coming into Australia as they might have been perhaps in the past. That's a very general statement, of course, but I think that there is a caution to be made about that challenge for students as well. So I'll just leave it there and throw it back to you, Hannah.
Yeah, no, that was great. I mean, yeah, maybe a general statement, like you say, but definitely one that kind of needs to be considered. It has definitely been a very kind of challenging, tough time, lots of change. And Melissa, Bronwyn, do either of you kind of want to add anything, have anything to kind of, yeah, draw more on perhaps?
I think I would just add that the scenes I saw yesterday with the first flight of students coming back into New South Wales was just so heartwarming. And when they interviewed the students, how they said it's been 2 years and they were just so much looking forward to being back in Australia. It was really wonderful to see that, and to see the staff and the universities out there supporting the students walk off that first flight. So it's a small step, but it's a first step. And we really do, as Paula said, need to look after those students. And I think they do have more of an expectation of us to look after them and support them after this time. And they know that the environment has changed. So we've got to work in a new environment as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's lovely to hear that, yeah, students are coming back and are excited and happy, as you say. It must have been really lovely to see. Melissa, did you have anything you wanted to add to this question?
Oh yeah, I think if we're talking about sort of helping students prepare, I think it's very easy to focus on the organisational aspects of house and study and computer and flights and all of those sorts of things. But I think having that help assisting students to prepare emotionally and mentally, and having those conversations with family and around how they're going to manage when they arrive in Australia, assuming if they are coming to Australia and not studying online, then really thinking that through and being prepared, I think, in that regard is something we all focus on the organisational. It's a lot easier than the emotional, I think, and the mental. And, these are big things. It's a big thing to do, to change countries, I think, as well, and focusing all that living away from home for the first time. So it's really that emotional, mental preparation, isn't it, that we can all assist our students with.
Yeah, definitely ensuring, like you say, that kind of support being given covers, all areas, organizational aspects, but also, that kind of more emotional support as well is really key to kind of cover everything. Thank you all. That was, really, really comprehensive first answer to our first question. So moving on, there's obviously been a very welcome move in higher education institutions to support student wellbeing across the sector. The Australian National Code stipulates that universities offer reasonable support to overseas students, irrespective of their place or mode of study. What measures of support would you like to see this include to support the wellbeing of international students? Before we go to Bronwyn to answer this one first, you'll just now see a poll appear on your screen. But yeah, Bronwyn, what would you like to talk about first?
Thanks, Hannah. I firstly would like to acknowledge that I'm speaking from the land of the Enawan and the Kamilaroi people, surrounded by a sense of belonging, both ancient and contemporary, of the world's oldest living culture. I also pay my respect to elders, both past, present, and emerging. I think I would like to start by making two comments before I answer the question. And the first is that we all need to be aware that the National Code sets out the minimum support levels universities are to provide to their students. So in other words, it doesn't set out best practice. That's for us to look at. And secondly, I do want to acknowledge that the Australian universities did move to provide additional and expanded support programs and services for both the students who remained in Australia from March 2020 onwards, and also for those students who had returned home or commenced their studies offshore, because many were allowed to begin their studies on a student visa under the regulatory relaxation offered by TEXA and ASCA, and they commenced from their home countries ostensibly as an onshore student. So thinking about the questions, some of the measures or improvements I think I'd like to see implemented to support the students' wellbeing would include arranging access, if you haven't already, to 24/7 online support for the students so that they can, when they need it, where they're living, have that access, and also include specialist access within those support measures. We also need to ensure that the students understand what has been offered by these support programs. So during your orientation programs in the welcome pack, make sure there's a comprehensive explanation of what each of the programs are designed to do and how the students can access them and why they should be accessing them. Something that was mentioned at the Asana conference last week by one of our bursary students was that they understood that there were the services offered to them, things such as Lifeline and Beyond Blue, but that the students' understanding of those particular organisations was that you had to be almost at the point of self-harm before you would contact them. They didn't feel that they were there for the lesser, if I could put it that way, issues, or just to phone and speak to someone. So as I say, really need to ensure the students understand what each of the services are about, because we have a lot of assumptions because we know what these services are, but the students don't quite pick up on that. So we need to be more explicit in how we tell them about these services. And also alongside the 24/7 support, universities need to ensure they make real contact with each of their students. And by this, I mean one-to-one or small meeting groups, and if at all possible, and hopefully face-to-face contact. And if this could be done at least once each semester, more often obviously would be preferable, but I think you actually need to make that initial contact so that the students can see who they're talking to and see an actual face and understand that that's the person I can go to and talk to about my initial issues, and small, large, whatever, within the university, outside the university, just want to talk about home, anything like that, just so that they know they have someone that they can speak with. This can be very resource intensive, I understand that. So I would suggest for the universities, if you have a buddy program in place, this could be an ideal way to use your students who want to engage in that buddy program, or to set one up if you don't already have one. And of course, for those students who undertake that role, you need to make sure that they're trained, because We also don't want those students, they need to know firstly when to escalate the issues they're hearing, but we don't want them to become overstretched, and they also need to have an opportunity to debrief as well, because I have seen some of these programs where the student it almost feels that they've got to take it on themselves, all the issues, and they're not quite sure, do I disclose what's been said to me? Don't I disclose? So you have to make sure that there's correct training that goes with it. And I would also suggest some form of payment, whether that's tuition, scholarship, less accommodation fees, or radically actually pay the students to do the work. And then nextly, I think all universities should have an understanding of and acknowledge the programs that have been offered within the communities. During this last 2 years, they have been absolutely vital. And in a lot of cases, it was the first place that students turned to, those organisations within their community. So you can investigate these. You can look at becoming part of them or creating joint programs. And this is because you need to assist the students where they're living, and the amount of time they spend outside the classroom is, the majority of their lives. So we have to recognise that. We have to support it in somehow. And we also have to understand the services that the students are seeking and what they're actually engaging with, so that we can also refer them to the correct services and understand what those services are. So you could have a sharing day where you invite all these organisations to come to the university, or you go to them, where you meet face to face, where you discuss what each of you can offer. So the community group understands what the university support services are if they need to refer the students back, and vice versa. I think that's absolutely vital that we build those community relationships. Next is around the regulatory environment. And I think that we all need to look, and we need to have a plan in place in case we end up faced by this kind of situation again. One that we can just pull down from the shelf and that we can share with our staff and students, and we make sure that the plan is centred around the wellbeing measures that we can put in place. And of course, we have an upcoming review of the ESOS Act, so I would suggest everyone read the review guidelines, get involved, and if you want to go above and beyond what they're requesting for information, it's our ESOS Act, and we should have a large input into it, and that's to commence later this month. Although there's not much time left in this month, so it should happen very soon. And of course, the final point I would raise would be treat each student as an individual. They're all different cohorts, and so we can have all our support programs, but I would suggest you overlay across it depending on which student is coming to you. So look at the different countries they're coming from. Look at the different regions within those countries they come to us from. Are they from a city or a rural background? What is their age? What study are they going to undertake? Is it ELICOS, undergraduate, postgraduate? If they're a research student, have they only got access to their supervisors, or are they aware they can go and speak with other people, because that can be very isolating? Consider their English language levels, and also don't exclude those who come from an English-speaking country. They can experience all the same issues that all of our other international students do. And especially look and recognise those who bring their families with them, because they have so many other issues that they're dealing with around schooling, around the isolation of their spouse, finding accommodation if the child's sick, finding, child-minding considerations. So have all your programs in place, but if you could just overlay it with the student that's coming to you, so that you are offering an appropriate support mechanism to that student. So I might just leave it there.
That was brilliant.
That was a lot.
Thank you so much. Yeah, lots to kind of think about and talk about there. And like you say, kind of some of the key things to pull out there is that communication across all areas, in terms of making sure that the students know what support is there, in terms of making sure that you understand what they need from that support, or what else they might need, and probably most key is, like you said, understanding that every international student is having a different experience and might be feeling different and need different things. Paula, did you have anything to add to that? It was a really comprehensive answer, Bronwyn. Thank you.
It was great to hear all of that, because and thank you, Bronwyn. The first thing you said was the national code provides requirement for minimum standards, and I think this is a very good time to be looking at that that idea of we're not delivering minimum requirements anymore. We now have to, as you said, refocus on individuals, small cohorts, the needs of students as they come and at various stages of their study. And I think Bronwyn, you've put in some wonderful suggestions for initiatives. I think we have perhaps, in Australia over time, as the international student programs grown and grown and grown, perhaps being I shouldn't say forced, but we have been delivering rather mass programs to mass groups of students. And I think that you can do that. You can deliver the content and you can deliver the information en masse, of course, but nothing is going to replace the one-to-one, the relationship and the engagement with students, because they've told us this. They've been telling us this for years, that they want to connect and they want to feel that they belong, and they want to know that they're safe, and they want to know that they're contributing as well. So yes, I thought that was a lovely response. Thanks, Bronwyn.
Thank you so much, Paula. Melissa, do you have anything to add to that? I think, a lot's been covered so far.
No.
But
Yeah, the only thing I think that probably comes to mind, particularly with this in supporting students, is timing really strikes as an important thing for me. Just because we maybe are ready to say to students, this is all the services that are available and this is what we've done traditionally at orientation. And then we say, job done. We've told the students about all these things and now they should know. And really, just because they're ready to deliver lots of information and present all these things doesn't mean the students are in any mindset to actually receive that. And so I think having information available to them at different times, some people might want to know all about it before they arrive. Some people, it might be when they arrive. Some people, it might be a month in. Sometimes it might be that assessment time when stuff really hits. And that's when they want to find out about these things. So I think having information that they are aware of and where to go, and knowing, yes, I can go there, I can go there, and having that available to them at all times, and never assuming that just because we've said at orientation, there is support services, there are Lifeline, there's the counselling service. It doesn't mean at any point that students are actually ready to take that information in. And that is our responsibility. It's not the students' responsibility on that front.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and ties into many of the themes of kind of communication and really understanding students' needs that we've talked about so far. So moving on to kind of our next question. Culture shock can be a problem for international students, but are there any overlooked areas where they may struggle, and how can institutions help these students to settle in? Melissa, do you want to kind of take this one on first?
Thank you. Yeah, sure. And first of all, I'd like to as well acknowledge the Wurundjeri people, the Kulin Nation, and acknowledge your elders past and present, because it is the land that I am on today as well. So there's a couple of things I think that we can help students with culture shock. And I think we've probably had the opposite problem almost recently with students not coming to Australia. There's no culture shock, and therefore there's never become, very hard to become part of that culture and part of the institution. So I think we've probably had the opposite problem recently, but with our students hopefully returning, we can move towards getting our students back into our communities and back into, I guess, the cultures that surround them in Australia. I think one of the big things for me that I would like to see to help students with that culture shock is to celebrate international students more. And I think after COVID-19 and not having our international students, I hope that would actually be something that we're going to change quite a bit. International students add so much to our culture of our cities, our towns, our institutions, our classrooms. I think we've really taken that for granted over previous years. So I'd love to see more of a celebration of what international students and what they bring. These students, they're studying often in their second, third, sometimes fourth, fifth language. That's an amazing thing to do. What we can learn from those students is amazing. I could never consider doing something like that. I would just fail straight away. And I know, so for example, I know at the start of our degree, we've always had a competition of who speaks the most languages. Usually we get to someone who speaks 5 or 6 languages, which is, you know, and the other students who speak one language are always in there, like generally English. Wow, that's amazing. And so we celebrate the international students. We also have a competition of seeing how many languages are spoken in the room. Often there's new languages that people have never heard of, or might be students online, and everyone's learning from, like, these are cultures and languages I've never heard of, often for those local students. Another idea can help students settling in is setting the first assignment, even a group assignment, in another country, in your international students' country, your main international. Set it in China, set it in India, and then suddenly those international students become the most important people in the room. Everyone wants their knowledge of what happens in their country. So if you can set it in the systems of that country, it really values that international students' knowledge and experience. So I would just really like to see us to help that culture shock with students, to celebrate them more, for them to actually say, when they feel they're not fitting and when it's not working, to go, oh, but I'm doing this and this is pretty amazing to be studying in another country, because it is a pretty amazing thing to do. It's a huge thing to do. And then I also think probably on the preparation side, we can help students more, I think, as well, that preparation before leaving, that what's it going to be like, how am I going to feel, hearing from other international students who have done the same thing, how did it go for them, what were their ups and downs, understanding that there will be ups and downs and knowing that those are normal. So normalising that culture shock, recognising the culture shock and what it's going to be like, just hearing that it's normal and it's not just you experiencing those problems, I think is really important. And then it's just those simple ways to deal with it, of keeping an open mind, tips on how to speak to local students or other international students, how to start those conversations, and knowing how to engage there, sharing experiences with others, and also acknowledging that it's exhausting. It is exhausting to be constantly on that lookout of what is going on around me. I've got to take this in, I've got to take that in, I'm learning these concepts in a new language, and acknowledging, I think, those issues and really doing all that we can to prepare students before they leave their home country, before they get to us. So I think that is a big thing for me, is that preparation, and then the institution or the culture around them celebrating those international students.
Yeah, thank you so much, Melissa. That was, yeah, really lovely to kind of, yeah, hear you talk about really celebrating all the different kind of cultures that, you know, international students are bringing. And like you say, especially to recognise that it can be quite isolating, and that, yeah, to kind of acknowledge and recognise that is really important. Paula or Bronwyn, do either of you want to kind of add anything to this question on culture shock?
I think, thank you, Melissa, for that, because I think you're absolutely right in the celebration of culture. And I think that we haven't really grasped that as well as we could have. We need to be reminding ourselves all the time about cultural difference and diversity. And it goes back to Bronwyn's previous point about small cohorts and recognising different cohorts. But the cultural, what I was thinking when you were speaking about that was, I do think there is a place for much better cultural training, intercultural skills, communication skills, not just assuming that everybody who works with international students understands what culture shock is, or what, you know, how to bridge the gaps, for example, or how to deal with culture shock if it appears, and not to think of it perhaps as a negative, but to think of it as something that it is a part of a transition, it is part of an experience. It does actually make students much stronger in a way, because they can reflect on their own cultural orientations and other orientations, and if they have the right support and if they have understanding and skilled people who are working with them, that is a wonderful development, personal development for them. So I'd be pitching for more training and for more professional development in this space as well.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Paula. Thank you so much. Yeah, like you say, it's so key that kind of everyone involved in the kind of international students' journey is kind of aware of issues like culture shock, like you say, in order to kind of support them kind of in the best way possible. Bronwyn, did you have anything you wanted to add before we kind of move on to the next question?
I think the only thing I would add is, having just come through the last 2 years, is that with the students returning, we're going to have to be very conscious that some of them may come with feelings of loss, having lost 2 years in their life. Like a lot of us, we will need to acknowledge that they're 2 years behind in their studies in many cases, and they're also going to come into an Australia that was shut off from the rest of the world for 2 years, and we're going to have to help them navigate some of the community feelings around returning students. And I think there needs to be a lot more work done in that space, not just by the institutions, but by our local communities, our government. We haven't got the messaging right yet, and we've had 2 years to think about this. So I am concerned about the students. They've got all the normal culture shock, but they're going to be worried about their families they've left behind, concerned about themselves, and yes, facing various issues that are going to come out of the community that perhaps we haven't even had a chance to think about yet.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Like you say, it's not just maybe what the kind of experience would have been a few years ago. There's kind of so much more else to consider, and it is really key that, yeah, all of that is kind of taken into account when kind of supporting international students. So we will answer the floor for questions soon. So to all our attendees, please do remember to type your questions into the Q&A section so that we can, yeah, answer them before we kind of finish at past. But just to start us off, Bronwyn, while we allow everyone to kind of type in their questions, from your position as immediate past president of Asana, have you noticed a difference in the type of support over the pandemic with students offshore? And in general, are there useful measures of support that have been developed that institutions might take forward?
I think one of the biggest things I've noticed in the support in the institutions is that everyone has taken ownership and wanted to be involved. It hasn't just been the role of the support staff. The academic staff have stepped up and they've been absolutely fabulous. They've recognised the difference in time zones and they've offered support outside the normal hours. I don't know how that's going to be sustained going forward, but if they could do something like that, especially for those students who aren't yet able to come back to Australia, that would be absolutely fantastic. And I'd just like to applaud all the institutions for everything that they've put in place. You know, it could be as small as having a chat room where students can go in and talk, and whether it's a support staff or an academic member in there. Yeah, look, there's been so many little things put in place, but I think that they've been targeted, and that was the right way to go, rather than trying to put an all-encompassing support program in place. Make sure that you look at what the students really needed, and that communication with those offshore has been absolutely vital, and that's something that I would really like to see continue going forward.
Yeah, no, that's great. It's kind of lovely to hear the kind of positive change that hopefully will continue on. So we do have a few questions in our Q&A, so I'll kind of open them out to any of you who would like to answer. So the first one is it compulsory for international students to return to Australia for study once the border is open, as some of them may worry about the flight fare, quarantine expenses, and health risks during the journey, so they may want to wait or defer their study. So yeah, is it compulsory? Who would like to kind of answer this one?
I can jump in there.
Yeah.
We've been told by our regulators that we have at least until mid-2022 for the students to be returning. They'll remain flexible with the regulatory environment until then. And so that may mean that some institutions may open their campuses, some may not. So I believe most will, but we haven't been told that we have to tell our students they need to come back into Australia and come on campus. However, it also, because we've got the two different departments, plus we've got the regulators, it's going to depend on also the students' visas, and when their visas are due for renewal, students may need to come back for post-study work rights as well. So it may be an imperative other than being told you need to come back to Australia. So there's a lot tied up in this question. And I think we have to do it on a case-by-case basis for each student.
Yeah, brilliant. So actually this next question, it has a couple of kind of votes, so I'm going to come to this one next because it seems like a few people would like us to kind of answer this one. And I think it links to something that Bronwyn was saying earlier. When you use student helpers or buddies, do you recruit only high achieving students, or do you link students with those from the same background or randomly? How would that work potentially? Who wants to take this one?
From the buddy programs I've seen, they can be for different reasons. Some can be within a particular program. So there may be law students, so they have the third year or fourth year law students budding up with a first year law student. So that can be for an academic reason. There can be the buddies who will talk to students thinking of even attending your institution, so they can get a feel of what life is like, not just in Australia, but at that particular university. And then there are the support buddies that they can have 5, 10 students that are assigned to them that they can just get a call from, or go out to events with, just introduce them to what university life is like. So it depends how you want to set up your buddy system. You can have a whole range. So just look at what your needs are as to how you would like to set that up. And no, it's not just the high achievers, it's those who are enthusiastic about being involved in the program. They're the students that you need.
Yeah, definitely. And like you say, it can often depend on kind of what kind of buddy system is in place and what the kind of levels of kind of help is needed. But yeah, definitely enthusiasm, like you said, is always kind of needed in those systems. So we have another question here, going back to culture shock. So as well as culture shock, how do we account for the fact that students will be arriving facing challenges of personal shock and trauma caused by the direct and indirect impacts caused by COVID-19 in their home countries? Melissa or Paula, would either of you like to tackle this one?
Yeah, sure. And happy for you to add anything, Paula. I think we've probably had students coming to us for a long time who have had past trauma and past issues. And so I think we have a higher proportion of students maybe who have experienced that and experienced the stress and anxiety as well around. Then also on top of that, moving countries as well. So in a way, I feel like that's not a new thing, but probably higher levels. So I think it's probably still doing the same stuff that we've been doing in the past. But as we've talked about here, these additional things that we can do of more preparation, talking to students about the different services and ensuring they see a friendly face and know who to speak to. You know, if something is going wrong, oh yes, but I know that person, I can go and speak to that person. And so I think it's those similar things and being prepared for that as well. And I think it is a really good question, because to think about it in the first place is probably just is the start, I think, of that. So I think that's a really good question and a great point.
Yeah, definitely. Paula or Bronwyn, do you want to kind of add anything to this one?
Just jump in too. I think I agree with Melissa. We have been, and I think of all the natural disasters and all sorts of things that the students experience in their home countries. And I think one of the things about Australia is that it's always been seen as a safe place. And I think this notion, and this is in the ISS program, emphasising safety and security and rules, you know, justice, rights, communities that are safe. And I think we've all become much more aware, I think, really very, very very directly aware of safety in Australia ourselves, you know, residents here. I would like to see a continuation of a lot of those community programs, support for students in communities, and changing attitudes or encouraging positive attitudes of welcome for students, which I think is all there. Obviously, you often get resistance to strangers and newcomers and all sorts of other things. But I would love to see, and I think students can do this themselves. I think the student organisations, mentors, student volunteers, students get involved in all sorts of community groups. I think that is a very important and great opportunity for the safety aspects and sense of belonging aspect that goes right well beyond the universities, where of course it's always been a fairly paramount importance as well. So yeah, I think that expectations and students who may be a little fearful and of course, you know, with all the natural things, are going to be hesitant and cautious, but we can do quite a lot to mitigate that.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, both of you. Right, we'll move on to our next question. There's just a couple more, so we should have exactly the right amount of time we need to kind of answer these remaining questions. So under Australian health regulatory law, our counsellors are unable to provide interventions to students located outside Australia. Is there a way around that to provide counselling support to offshore students to align with our commitment to provide equitable service to all students? Who would like to take this one on? If you do need to refer back to the questions, they are just in the Q&A for you as well, by the way. Anyone want to take this one? Bronwyn, anything for this one?
Yeah, I had heard that was the case and that a lot of institutions were seeking legal advice on whether their counsellors could provide the support. I guess it depends if it's at what level the support is being offered, if it's just a general discussion or whether it's almost a one-on-one consultation. I think if you get to the point where you have a student that needs that, you should be arranging in-country support for that particular student. But until this issue is sorted out, yeah, it could be a bit of a minefield, and I don't really have an answer for that one at the moment, aside from seeking in-country support.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that definitely sounds like a kind of very tricky current issue that seems to be ongoing. Paula and Melissa, I assume kind of a similar answer from both of you for this one.
Yeah, I think it is. It is a little bit beyond the university's purview as well. You know, I think that counselling, offshore counselling, I think that we need to know. We need to have some guidance about that. And I've heard the same the same issue expressed by Bronwyn, but I think it is a little bit outside our scope.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Sounds like it's very much a kind of ongoing difficult issue at the moment. So I've actually got another question here, which is actually from one of our OUP staff. How have staffing levels in the area of onboarding international students been affected during the pandemic? And what will be the impact, if any, on the higher education sector's ability to help students returning to Australia? Who wants to take this one on?
Yes.
Look, there have been a lot of staff losses throughout the universities. Some were where universities just put out redundancy programs and asked for volunteers to say, "I will take a redundancy." And unfortunately, I don't think that they reviewed where the needs were. And then the staff that were left at the university have needed to either be retrained or placed in different areas. We've lost a lot of our specialist staff, I guess, is the bottom line. So we may need a lot of retraining in that area. I was personally disappointed to see the number of support staff, particularly the international support staff, who were lost out of the institutions. But I do notice that quite a few are now rehiring as well. So I'm hoping that the powers that be have identified the need for those specialist staff. I don't mind if we mainstream, so long as we keep our specialist knowledge. So there will be, I think, not enough support. And of course, the National Code says we have to have enough support, but they don't stipulate what that actually is. And I think universities need to ensure that all their staff are aware of how to support, how to onboard and be there at those peak periods. And I think that may be the way we go. We look at moving staff to where they're needed during the peak periods.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Bronwyn. Right, it's just a couple more questions. So the next one is it appropriate to link in international students with LGA's multicultural programs? Anyone have any kind of thoughts or advice on this?
By LGAs, you mean local government areas?
Yes, I do, sorry.
I would say so, yes. I think that, it's servicing students where they live. And I think that it kind of goes back to this question about staffing and staff resources, professional resources, training. Very often the, ethnic communities or cultural groups in communities are very highly experienced and very well established and run programs. I've known of many church groups who have provided programs for students for years and years, and they seem not to have the same vagaries of staffing cuts and redundancies and restructures that universities have. So I think that may be the new model. And can I just go back to again something you said, Bronwyn, about all the things that had happened, all the positive things that had happened in adjustments and redeveloping services, restructuring or redeploying services, and academics being involved and so on. I think if we could capture all of those kind of initiatives in a basket, and also look at all the community initiatives that have kind of emerged during the last 2 years that have become much more active and integrated, perhaps even with university services, we could have a much better system rather than lots of different groups doing their own thing. You know, we could have much more collaborative and much better partnerships, much healthier relationships with community partners and so on. I'd like to see that, and that might address some of the, you know, the issues that we have with staff shortages within universities as well. Draw on whatever expertise there is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
And the
Thank you
students
so much.
and the students will tell us. The student, if it's good, if it's a good service, the students will know that. They'll be able to tell us that.
Yeah, definitely. Brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone. We just have one more question, which I'll just kind of quickly answer. And then, yeah, any of you, obviously, as lead advisors and reviewers, do feel free to kind of chime in with more details. But someone has asked, will we be offering a module for international students regarding settling in on the International Student Success course? The answer is yes, that topic is definitely covered. We have 4 modules which are preparing for student life in Australia, culture, adapting and managing expectations, effective communication, and looking after yourself and finding support. So within those 4 modules, topic of kind of settling in is definitely covered, and that comes under kind of organisational things, as we talked about earlier, but also that more kind of emotional support, you know, looking at culture shock, kind of dealing with kind of themes of loneliness, homesickness. So it really does cover kind of all aspects of that kind of settling in process. But I mean, if any of our kind of lead advisors or reviewer would like to kind of add anything, then please do, before we kind of bring this webinar to a close.
Yes, is the answer to that, and I think going is a little plug for the ISS, isn't it, for the success program? It's I think it's very well structured, it's very well balanced. It's also very well supported by evidence and resources, and I think it's a terrific, I wouldn't say backup, but it's a terrific resource right across the board for everybody who looks after international students. And I think it's I've been looking at this obviously for several months now. That and going over and over and over and looking, well, you know, circumstances change, you know, the world changes. Is this still, you know, relevant impression, addressing the issues? And I have to say, I mean, this is this is not a plug. Honestly, yes, I think it does. Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, that's really lovely to hear. Thank you so much. And yeah, I mean, like many of our courses, what this course can do is serve as a really great kind of starting point to kind of build on other types of support and other types of support available for international students, because it really does cover so much. But thank you, Paula, that was really lovely. So that is it from us today. Thank you so much to everyone who attended and asked questions and engaged with us. It was really, really wonderful to kind of hear what you all had to say. And thank you so much to our 3 speakers, Dr. Paula Durance, Dr. Melissa Russell, and Bronwyn Gilson. We really do appreciate your time today. You can find out more about the International Student Success course by downloading the flyer, which is available in the handout section of this webinar, which you'll find on the right-hand panel. And for any other information, such as sales inquiries or information about free trials, please email Lucinda Cook at Academic Partnerships Manager at lucinda.cook@oup.com, which you can also see on our screen now. But other than that, thank you so much, everyone, and I hope you all have a lovely day. Thank you.